Annie Besant was already moving away from Bradlaugh's rather sectarian atheism. She was now an active socialist. She was in the bloody demonstration in Trafalgar Square on November the 13th, 1877, when socialist marchers were met by mounted police and guardsmen with fixed bayonets. Still, Annie Besant's unquiet spirit was not at rest. Perhaps her militant atheism and socialism had taken her too far from her mother and her upbringing. At any rate, she was already dabbling in spiritualism when, one day in 1889, a book came in for her to review. It was H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine. She was ripe for conversion.
I was sitting alone at my desk in the Reformer office, immersed in a deep but nearly hopeless longing to solve the riddle of life and mind, when I heard a voice speaking to me. I could see nobody, but the voice said, "Are you willing to give up everything for the sake of truth?" I didn't challenge him or ask questions. I wanted the truth, that was the fact. I was longing to have it intensely. So I went head over heels into the secret doctrine. I'm immersed in Madame Blavatsky. If I perish in the attempt to review her, you must write on my tomb, "She has gone to investigate the secret doctrine at first hand."
Mrs. Besant's conversion to Theosophy astonished the public. Theosophists believe that Madame Blavatsky was telepathically guided by Tibetan masters, and Annie herself came to think she'd been a Hindu in a previous life. How had she jumped from atheism and socialism straight into such ideas? Well, Theosophy was very vigorous and attractive. It appealed to people who were in revolt against narrow, outworn creeds. It offered them a higher teaching, the wisdom of the East, an ancient universal truth that underlay all religions alike. And this was just what Annie wanted.
Hello to...
Basically, the word occult in a dictionary meaning would indicate hidden from sight, obscure, beyond the scope of understanding, or mysterious. Now, the occultists, if we can generalize the term, believe that there are hidden teachings that have always been kept from the masses. And therefore there are all sorts of secret orders and initiation rites and so forth as we are progressively indoctrinated in these higher teachings. Occultism, then, is that which deals with the study of these teachings, and it insists that there are esoteric teachers in the form of masters and adepts that are available to teach us. And the occultists generally feel that there are intelligences in the universe that are as superior to man as man is superior to the black beetle. Now, these masters and adepts are the custodians of occult sciences, and we must make contact with them for instruction. And so almost invariably the occult teachings deal with some kind of psychic power or clairvoyance or a kind of mediumship of one sort or another through which we contact these higher beings. Now, I might say at this time that we're going to break the subject down to separate the one field of spiritualism, even though in a sense it would come under the heading of an occult teaching, basically because next week we're going to deal more with the paranormal and the psychic and so forth, and it seems fitting that we deal with spiritualism in that context.
There is a power for good in the universe, and you can use it.
Welcome to the Science of Spiritual Reality with me, Mitchell K. Jones.
The unfolding of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple. Psalm 119, verse 130.
I release every belief that true wisdom is hidden, distant, or reserved for special secrets or secret orders. I am guided by the Christ within, the living presence that reveals all I need to know.
Hello to brothers, sisters, and siblings once again. I'm going to do a little bit of commentary on the recent Jacobin article about the history of occultism and the left. But I want to start up. I recently did a thing on what I call Christian politics, and I think that also, sort of is inspired by Tolstoy and MLK and some of these other individuals who looked at Christianity and also the power of unity and love and how these things can change the world. But I wanted to talk about something also that when I'm recording right now, it's beginning of December 2025, and the president presented himself as sort of a right-wing populist, and said that this America First isolationism would return, and that he would end the endless wars. And now it seems we may go to war with Venezuela, a democratic socialist country, democratic socialist party, the Bolivarian movements that was started by Chavez in the 90s, Hugo Chavez, and very much informed by liberation theology and those the Latin American, Catholic progressive movements. But I think at the same time, and even amongst Trump's biggest supporters, one in particular, Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's this anti-war sentiment that Trump was not elected to start more wars and to perpetuate this genocide in Palestine and the situation in Ukraine. And so, in general, people are kind of sick of war, but as much as Trump presented himself as an outsider and as a populist, the war machine marches on. And I've been talking with people, and there does seem to be a lifting of consciousness and a raising of awareness, and this kingdom of heaven thought is beginning to take hold in the hearts of people. But it's like Charles Fillmore said in the First World War time, that peace will be achieved when the leaders have the consciousness of peace. And so, what we can do is to actually lift our own consciousness, and that vibration radiates out into the world through our actions, through our behavior, and also just through our consciousness, our emotions. And if we can consciously use our powers, our spiritual powers, for good, then we can create a better world.
If you took the tone of it out, if you took
The Forgotten History of Socialism and the Occult by Meagan Day. If today's socialists know little about early socialist philosophies, they know even less about the fascinating relationship between utopian socialism and occultism. Non-Marxist socialist currents in the 19th and early 20th centuries were closely intertwined with esoteric occult movements. Where one was found, the other was usually near at hand. Though we may be loath to admit it, socialist history featured more than a few seances amid the strikes. The dialogue between socialism and occultism began in France in the early 1830s, when pre-Marxist socialists initiated a search for hidden knowledge and universal laws that they hoped would liberate humanity. It continued in the United States in the 1840s and 1850s, where utopian socialist communes served as refuges for spiritual seekers who fled traditional churches but retained their belief in supernatural phenomena and the divine revelation of hidden mysteries. By the early 1870s, materialist socialism was making inroads in the American working class. The Knights of Labor had just been founded, marking the arrival of the trade union movement and Marx's class struggle. Centric International Workingmen's Association, IWA, was gaining traction. Oddly, one IWA local became helmed by an abolitionist, suffragette, and famous spiritual healer named Victoria Woodhull, who decided to run for president in 1872 under the group's banner. Marx himself grumbled about Woodhull and her middle-class faction of spiritists, whom he regarded as swindlers and riffraff, leading the movement astray. Though we may be loath to admit it, socialist history featured more than a few seances amid the strikes. How did a psychic medium end up embedded in a Marxist organization to begin with? We can only understand this episode by recognizing that, while the materialist ideology of the IWA was at this point worlds away from the esoteric theories of spiritualists, socialism and occultism occupied very tight quarters for many decades. Occasional run-ins of this sort would continue until the materialist parameters of the labor movement were officially established and the siren song of fascism beckoned occultists rightward. Up to that point, it was not uncommon to encounter dyed-in-the-wool socialists who dabbled in fortune-telling or attempted to make contact with the dead. In 1825, the year of his death, the French social reformer Henri de Saint-Simon published a book called Nouveau Christianisme, New Christianity. As esotericism and religion scholar Egil Asprem writes, Saint-Simon's project was the rejuvenation of Christianity by ridding it of corrupt priestcraft and establishing a progressive, positive religion dedicated to the perfection and regeneration of humanity here on earth. Crucial to this task was the elevation of the poor. Adherents to Saint-Simon's ideas were the first to be called socialists. But while socialism became axiomatically associated with secularism in later years, its passionate forerunners during France's July monarchy period were anything but. Religion scholar Julian Struby explains, the Saint-Simonians and other socialists saw themselves struggling against a social fragmentation and coldness that had supposedly resulted from 18th century atheism and materialism. In their eyes, those circumstances were responsible for the disruption of the social bonds, as they were the driving force behind the egoist mercantilism, suffocating the lower classes. The emergence of capitalism corresponded with a process of disenchantment that seemed to suck all the magic out of the world. The Saint-Simonians were, in protest and defiance of this icy alienation, interested in mounting a counteroffensive suffused with warm, romantic feeling. Struby reveals how overtly and intensely religious their movement was. The Saint-Simonians saw themselves as the heralds of a new golden age that would overcome the social fragmentation and realize a harmonious unity of religion, science, and philosophy. They declared themselves a church, the Église Saint-Simonienne, and regarded themselves not as the theoreticians of a politico-economic doctrine, but as apostles, preaching the revelations of their prophet Saint Simon. In 1848, two world-altering events happened. Marx and Engels debuted their materialist brand of socialism with the publication of the Communist Manifesto, and Europe erupted in a series of revolutions that dragged socialism into the realm of real, high-stakes politics. Thereafter, materialist socialism was on the rise and utopian socialism on the wane. But utopianism's tale was long, having produced many ideas, thinkers, activists, and real-world experiments that would persist for decades. It also produced another strain of thought altogether, occultism. As Struby shows, occultism emerged in France not merely after utopianism, but straight out of it. The widely regarded founder of occultism, Alphonse Louis Constant, pen name Eliphas Levi, was deeply involved in the pre-1848 Saint-Simonian socialist movement. Indeed, he debuted his ideas about Kabbalistic magic in a French socialist journal. Constant's first radical publication in 1841 had been La Bible de la Liberté, the Bible of Liberty, which Struby describes as an extravagant mixture of socialist, mystical, romantic, and feminist ideas, par for the course among Saint-Simonians at the time. In the 1850s, Constant, now writing under his pseudonym, published works including Dogme et Ritual de la Haute Magie, Transcendental Magic, Histoire de la Magie, History of Magic, and La Clef de Grands Mystères, the Key to the Great Mysteries. These became the foundational texts of the Esoteric movement, heavily influencing later occultists like Madame Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley. Quite simply, the founder of occultism was a socialist. Struby's interrogation of Constant's work finds no ruptural pivot. Rather, his ideas flowed somewhat seamlessly between utopian socialism and eclectic esotericism, both of which concern themselves with the pursuit of hidden universal laws that, once revealed, would liberate humanity. Marx and Engels found those laws in the dynamics of class struggle and the internal contradictions of capitalism. Eliphas Levi found them in the secret correspondences between Hebrew letters and tarot cards. The androgynous Baphomet who reconciled all cosmic opposites, the astral light that recorded every human thought and action like a universal memory bank, and the conviction that Jesus Christ was actually an initiate of Egyptian mysteries who had discovered how to manipulate these invisible forces, all of which could be mastered through ritual magic to achieve nothing less than the regeneration of humanity and the establishment of a universal theocratic socialism ruled by initiated magi. The relationship between non-Marxist socialism and esotericism persisted into the late 19th century. French esotericists continued to publish in socialist journals, where they also warned against the movement's ambition and vitality being eroded by the low politics of the materialists. The materialists' response to them, meanwhile, ranged from outright hostility and ridicule to a kind of amused curiosity tempered by comradely advice to focus on practical matters. When the most influential esotericist organization of the late 19th century, the Theosophical Society, founded its first chapter in France called the Isis Lodge, it held its inaugural meeting in the offices of the Revue Socialiste, an ecumenical socialist journal that also published Engels's famous broadside against the Utopians. The Isis Lodge was founded in 1887 by Louis Dramert, who had previously written an article in the Review exhorting fellow socialists to recognize the intrinsic value of occultism. Utopian socialism and eclectic esotericism both concern themselves with the pursuit of hidden universal laws that, once revealed, would liberate humanity. Dramert died shortly thereafter in the Maghreb fighting for the rights of Algerian workers. He died every bit as much a socialist as an esotericist. He was hardly singular. As embarrassing as it may have been for the materialists of the era, there were plenty of earnest socialists who believed a better world lay beyond capitalism, and that uncovering the hidden laws that bind humanity and cosmos would hasten its arrival. Occultism may have emerged from utopian socialism, but so, too, did Marxist materialism. Where the latter flourished, the former stood no chance at survival.
If you took out certain sections of it, there was actually some interesting historical detail in it. It was talking about some of the occult roots of sort of earlier socialism. So, or vice versa, as to say, Eliphas Levi, one of the sort of basically the founders of modern Western occultism, was themselves a utopian socialist in the Saint-Simonian vein, as far as I'm aware. And it's kind of a connection that is rarely really talked about or known about. And it's interesting because it actually goes against this whole idea that a lot of people on the left have, that occultism is sort of inherently fascist. And there's this whole sort of like earlier, sort of late 19th, early 20th century, where there was actually quite a lot of mingling of occult practice and socialist ideas. And this article it's quite helpful in putting some of these ideas back into the conversation. But unfortunately, it just run through with this kind of very just sort of childishly sort of patronizing, sort of squirming at the idea of there being any kind of like connection between spirituality on the left, and this very hard sort of boundary between the rational and the mystical. And I think that's one thing that really has occupied a lot of my sort of work in the past, and it's going to continue to occupy it as I'm going forward. This idea that, well, first of all, that there is this kind of this thing that we can call rationality that is just completely shorn of any kind of emotional, spiritual kind of content, that it's just sort of this abstract sort of floating kind of principle that actually even exists. It doesn't even exist, let alone be a representation of how the left actually acts or how it should act. And just I find the whole thing really unhelpful, just to put it in simple terms, because for me, a lot of this is not just about sort of philosophical debates or metaphysical debates about what actually exists. Even if you come to this as atheistically as you possibly be, and you're simply interested in building socialism, we have to become better at how we talk about and how we approach spirituality, for purely practical reasons, if nothing else. Because if we need a global movement, if we need a new kind of global consciousness, it has to account for the fact that the vast majority of the people that we're going to be speaking to, that we're going to be organizing with, that we're going to be trying to create coalitions with on a global scale, are religious.
Okay, so right off the bat, my first initial impressions, and this is also a commentary on Graham Jones's commentary on the article, which I need to find the actual author of the article. But first, I agree with Graham Jones on this separation between mysticism and rationalism. I think that is, I'm more non-dualistic when it comes to that approach. But I also think that the use of the term utopian socialism itself, which they continue to use, is a Marxist term. And I want to break down that Marxist binary between utopian and scientific socialism as well, because I think that accounts for a lot of this problem, is that that we see a dichotomy between utopian and scientific socialism. But a lot of the communitarian socialists saw their systems as a social science.
It is precisely, it's kind of what I would like to do, because in a lot of ways my book is about secularism, right? It's about a discursive formation, discourse in the Foucauldian sense of this kind of unimaginable, massive, what you might call it, I don't know, a logic of compatibility that allows things like machines and their metaphors and various Protestant subcultures and ghosts and the emergence of phrenology and anthropology and prison reform at Sing Sing and different kinds of new ways in which individuals are interacting with machines. Well, what do these have in common? Well, that is the outstanding question of the book, that it provides the answer. There is a discursive formation, which I try to label secularism, but as soon as I do that, I also understand that secularism doesn't really exist, and it's not a thing out there in the world that is holding all this together. And on some level, it's the conceit that I have. It's my vision of the archive that allows it to cohere. But at the same time, it does exist. And if you look at the kind of preponderance of evidence that I provide in various footnotes and long quotes from the archive of the mid-19th century, you begin to scratch your head in a way when you think about, evangelicals and spiritualists and anthropologists and prison reformers, all in a sense on the same discursive page in so many ways. And so in a lot of ways, that's the sort of take-home effect that I would like the book to have a little bit. Not that I nail something for all time or I prove something for all time that can never be disproved.
Okay, so John L. Modern, in his book Secularism in Antebellum America, he has a whole section about John Murray Spear and the New Motive Power. I've written quite a bit on John Murray Spear and the New Motive Power. I also see the New Motive Power as akin to some of the technological curiosities or technological excitements that we've had in recent years, related to AI and how that has sort of warped and distorted our view of ourselves and of spirituality, but at the same time has been sort of a tool for those things as well. But John Modern talks about how, in the 19th century, this was a time when there were rapid technological advancements. And again, people were looking at people like Charles Fourier, who, again, they wanted to look to Fourier because he was as they saw, a social scientist, as the American 19th century students of Fourier saw it, and that he was especially astute at observing the world and especially observing civilization and understanding these harmonial laws that you had to be aligned with in order to create a harmonious society, right? And so in the chaos of the market revolution, the Panic of 1837, which was a major economic depression, right at the heart of the market revolution and President Andrew Jackson's bank war, and that there was an economic bubble of speculation that had burst. I think we are entering another economic period like that very, very soon here. We're in the economic bubble now, where basically AI and overvaluations of companies, just like happened with WeWork, but this is on a much larger scale, actually, that this is propping up the entire economy, basically, but that these tools have reached the end of their use value, and they can't be more efficient without using more and more power. And so this economic bubble is going to burst soon, but there is hope that this is going to initiate the new heaven and new earth. And again, new heaven and new earth, that's something I've been thinking about as well, because it's I think a lot of premillennialist Christians and Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, people that see now is the premillennial time, and then there will be Armageddon when the world ends, but it says a new heaven and a new earth, not just a new earth, right? Jehovah's Witnesses say the earth will be a newly restored paradise, but there's also a new heaven. And so in a metaphysical reading of that, the new heaven is the new mind, right? There will be a new frame of thinking. And I already feel a timeline shift. I actually felt a timeline shift over the Thanksgiving holiday there, where I think things are really headed in a good direction, as I said earlier. But, you know, things have been trending that way for a while, but I do feel that there is a sort of shift. And I don't know if there's been any astrologically significant events that correspond to that. But speaking of correspondences, so like I mentioned, Charles Fourier was one of these social scientists, and also his idea of law of analogy meant that you could compare things and that the same laws would be at work in different things. So we're starting to get to a scientific mode of thinking here, right? This is coming out of the 19th century Enlightenment. This is sort of its post-Enlightenment renaissance of really the world that we know today. The birth of the world that the mode of thinking that we know today. Another one that 19th century Americans were very interested in, and this again was because of his scientific approach to the realm of spirit, was Emanuel Swedenborg, right? And Emanuel Swedenborg was a scientist. He did experiments. He was interested in physics and chemistry and these different things. But he also had visions of heavenly realms and hell as well. But he understood these as states of mind, as conditions that we all go through in life. And so for him, he developed this law of correspondences, that for everything in the material world, there is a corresponding thing in the spiritual world. But I just wanted to mention also one more thing, which I think is really the crux of all of this, is this concept of spiritual materialism. People think spirit and material are two different things. Again, rationalism and spiritual thinking, rationalism and mysticism are two modes of thinking. No, these what they're calling occult or esoteric traditions, but again, going after Catherine Albanese's research, she found that American so-called occultists tended to follow religious sunshine law rather than the secret knowledge idea or hidden knowledge idea. But again, so as John Modern says, and then again, John Murray Spear himself said, spirit is in as much as spirit is something and substantial, it is matter. So that's what I mean by spiritual materialism, that spirit is a higher, finer form of matter, a higher vibration of matter, but is substance, is matter, so to speak. So, and it also pervades everything. And this is aligned with some of the popular, what was popular maybe a few years ago, although it's sort of out of vogue now, but the quantum theory and string theory and things like that. But I think just because it's not as popular as it once was in academia, I don't think those theories are, worthy to be thrown in the trash. As far as I know, there haven't been things that have disproven that. I mean, a lot of the particle accelerator physics and things like that, they're still making discoveries about quantum particles, which are, small particles that are smaller than atoms. And their behavior, which appear sort of random, but seems to have some kind of order, some kind of underlying field that sort of holds all this stuff together. anyway, I don't really claim to understand the science, but that is to say that, and again, that's the same with New Thought, religious science, Christian science, is that these thinkers did not see themselves as anti-rationalists. They did not see themselves as mystics to the exclusion of logic, reason, scientific modes of thinking. No, these were scientific thinkers that wanted to apply rationalism and that Enlightenment logic to the spirit realm, to religious realm. And that was part of an ongoing secularizing project through the 18th and 19th centuries, as John Modern talks about in his book Secularism in Antebellum America, that the secularizing process was a process of scientificizing, if I could say that, if that's a word, scientificizing spiritual matters, religion. So the ideas of religion didn't go away. They began to be examined scientifically and then and rationally. And this rational inquiry did not debunk these spiritual ideas. It actually led to a richer renaissance of philosophy and spiritual,ism and the revelations of Andrew Jackson Davis and the revelations and projects of then John Murray Spear in the 1850s, and the other spiritualist socialist communities like Excelsior in Ohio, Harmonia in Michigan, where Sojourner Truth lived, the Thomas Lake Harris's Brotherhood of New Life communities in New York and then in California. So yeah, this was a concept of modernism, a concept of secularism, and it was applied to the spiritual realm. It didn't replace spirituality. It actually became part of the web, the intellectual web at the time that included mysticism and spirituality.
But basically, one of the interesting things is that as, let's say, many of the markers of secularization decline. For instance, if you look at declining church attendance across Western Europe or parts of North America, or people's reported respect for the authority of the church, when this happens, which looks like secularization, older theorists other than me had imagined that meant people were stripping away all of their beliefs after that. But actually, if you look at the sociological evidence, as institutional religion declines in authority, people have more belief in ghosts, more belief in spirits. They have unmet needs. We could even imagine that there's a sort of psychology that is of unmet needs, although I don't speculate about why. But in any case, they don't stop believing in, let's say magic, myth, and spirits. At the very least, there seems to be an inverse correlation between belief in God and belief in ghosts. So there was a famous sociological study in England that showed people reporting belief in God was going down as people reported belief in ghosts was going up. And I think we see similar patterns in places like the Czech Republic and elsewhere. So for that reason, I think one of the things that actually fuels so-called enchantment, or the alternative to disenchantment, is actually a decline of institutionalized religion, or at least and a kind of fragmentation of belief that causes more things to appear that makes people read each other as either superstitious or believing in magic or spirits, etc. So anyway, that's part of the sociological stuff. But we could take a step back too. The other thing that you mentioned that I want to underscore for your readers is that you're exactly right. There's this myth of rupture, and we know it's a myth because it keeps being told about different time periods. It's supposed to be like, it's like the moment where everyone got rational, and people are like, oh, that happened in the Protestant Reformation, or that happened in the Scientific Revolution, or that happened with the printing press, or that happened with the rise of, let's say, a particular stage in capitalism, or it happened, there's a repeated story about this moment where everything got rational. And one of the things I discuss in the book is that story, that there was a ruptural moment, emerges first in a very significant way in Germany at the beginning beginning of the 19th century, and then it becomes a myth in search of its own time period. So even before people had identified it with the Enlightenment, or even had an even notion that there had been a period called the Enlightenment, they back projected a moment of rupture. And in a very tight period of about 50 years, all of those different possible moments that could have been the rupture were generated and back projected, basically. So it's a myth in search of history in some particular sense.
But we didn't bring it back in with Buddhism so much as dialectical.
There may be some wisdom in the early utopian socialists' esotericism, particularly their observations about the coldness of capitalism and the need for a certain humanistic warmth in anti-capitalist resistance. Nevertheless, materialist politics have also functioned as a necessary prophylactic, encouraging political productivity by keeping socialists focused on earthly dynamics and battles to be fought in this world. Our movement is better off for esotericism's drift rightward. The right is welcome to distract itself with necromancy while we engage in rational political and economic analysis to strengthen the workers' movement. The history of socialism and the occult suggests that Marxism is an effective exorcism.
As dialectical materialism, and you've got people doing these meditations.
I was thinking about something that Mitch Horowitz said about New Thought, that New Thought at its core is a very radical idea. And that idea is that by changing your thought and changing your mind, that you can change your reality. And that's very empowering to people, to individuals. It can be very empowering. And a big aspect of it too is confidence in yourself, self-esteem, defeating the anxiety and the fears of the world, overcoming those things, denying them any power over you, and affirming that you are deserving of good things to happen, and that good things are happening, that they are happening to you. It's kind of a cliche in New Thought that you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. And Graham Jones brought up a Audre Lorde quote or something about, how the individual, consciousness, there has to be a moment of almost an epiphany, which is like a religious experience. It's like what people like Charles Finney and others have reported as, the conversion experience. It's even, Joseph Smith confronting or coming across Moroni in the Sacred Grove in Palmyra, and at the same time that, again, that, although I think Christopher Lasch's critiques of narcissism, which people tend to misunderstand, it's not self-love, it's an obsession with self and a distortion of self-image also. And can often entail a lot of self-loathing, actually, rather than self-love. But he talks about how there was this shift from social activism in the 60s and 70s towards, self-help, human potential movement, and things like that. So there was a move from the external to the internal, but at the same time too, there has to be a dialectic between external and internal, as I've talked about this many times before. But something Slavoj Žižek said that was interesting was that, you could devote yourself. You know, when people navel gaze, they look at themselves. You know, he talked about how people now feel guilt about not being their true self, about not fulfilling their true potential. You know, they feel guilt about things about themselves rather than not fulfilling their duty to community or family or whatever, you know, things that people used to feel guilty about. So again, there's a move from outer to inner. But this obsessive navel gazing, this solipsistic narcissism ultimately is detrimental to the self and to the self-image. And that really, if you want to find yourself, what you should really do is devote yourself to something external to you, to a movement, to a political project, to a religion, to a social movement, a hobby, or something that is bigger than yourself. But it made me think about what people often report in epiphanous experiences, religious experiences, meditation, collective prayer, kirtan, performance meditation, and also I'll include with that as well this psychedelic experience. A lot of people report this on taking psychedelic substances, is that the overwhelming feeling that they feel when they have these mystical or religious experiences is a feeling of connected to everything and everyone around them. A feeling that they are a part of all of this, that they are quantumly entangled with everything, with it all, and that they're in unity with it all. Well, how can you help but then have a communitarian attitude after that experience, right? If you are a part of everything, something I say is all the time is, how can I hate my brother when I am my brother? You know, how can I be hard on my brother and my sister when I am them? You know, Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because it is you. They are you. And so that feeling of connected, you know, being connected to all of creation, all of existence, and to other individuals, other human beings, and not just human beings, I mean all life, plants and animals, and everything with consciousness. Now they're finding plants have some sort of consciousness as well, so you know, and that they have their ways that they communicate through vibrations and through motion. Roots that are connected have some kind of communication between them. So we are all connected, and just as Charles Fillmore said, socialism has a truth at the back of it. We are all one, and everything belongs to everyone. So, and that's again, you know, something that if we do want to create a better, more just, more equal world, we're going to have to lean into those instincts. And, you know, one of the things that the Jacobin article talks about it is that, you know, occultism, so-called, or, you know, I'll just say the more general phrase mysticism, because I don't like the idea of things being occulted from view or things being esoteric, being secret, but being out in the open, being sunshine law of faith. But that, you know, cede no ground to the the dark ones, you know. Our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers of this system and the wicked ones in the high places. So, you know, we are sort of engaged in, I don't want to say a spiritual warfare, because we're non-resistant about it, you know. It's a matter of going with the flow. Because, you know, do you know what side God is on? God is on all our sides, right? And so, because we're all part of it. And so, as Martin Luther King says, you know, how long must we wait? Not long. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
I don't believe in going deep into your inner self. Sorry to be brutal. If you go deep into it, you find deep shit there, I claim. Monstrous fantasies and so on. I believe that the only way to overcome yourself is to identify with your mask. My favorite movie here, Rossellini, you should see it, you can get it on YouTube, from 1960, I think, with Vittorio De Sica, General della Rovere. De Sica plays a poor guy who is caught, it's still occupied Italy, caught by the Nazis, and since he looks exactly like General della Rovere, a big name of resistance, they tell him, we killed Della Rovere, but resistance that we have in prison don't know this. So go there, pretend that you are General Della Rovere, and people will confide in you, and you will tell us that. You can guess what is the ending. He identifies so much to his role that he is ready to die. He doesn't say anything, and he is shot publicly as General Della Rovere. In this sense, I am for good alienation. Who cares about his real self, a poor beggar, and so on? In this complete identification with another, you can find freedom.
I was thinking too.
So I think there's, when we're talking about this kind of period, we're still talking about a time of enormous kind of social change, technological change, scientific change, the breakdown of many certainties. In some ways, obviously, this has never stopped, but I think there's some actual comparison to what we're going through now. We've been going through for the past maybe 10 to 20 years, what feels like a massive acceleration of change. And I mean, if we were to be sort of like, again, sort of like trying to be rationalistic and anthropological or sociological about it, we might step back and you might look at someone like me and be like, oh, well, I see you're interested in spirituality because you're living during this time where there's all this accelerated uncertainty. And so you're turning towards things that are going to help you cope, right? That's why you're becoming more spiritual. And that's the nice, easy answer. And I'm like, okay, yeah, there is definitely something to that we always have to understand there's some sort of structural factor to it. But then there is also kind of like, again, that kind of has to be brought back into the notion of political praxis. And so when we're talking about, for example, you're looking back at the 19th century, what might that actually have been bringing to people? Because it's not just sort of an arbitrary connection. It's not just that people happen to be into socialism and happen to be into the occult. For occultists, for leftist occultists, the two went hand in hand. It wasn't a case of just happening to converge. It was, they were actually trying to integrate their understanding of both. Now, I'm not a historian. I don't have a huge amount of knowledge of this, and this is something that I'm actually starting to do more research of now as I'm going into a new project. There's a friend of mine, Lauren Kennedy. She's been doing some research on, particularly in Britain, on the connection between socialism and occultism, and searching through occult journals, looking for instances of people talking about socialist ideas, revolutionary ideas, and just doing these very large kind of qualitative data analysis, and finding that actually the majority of the mentions are positive ones. They're ones where people are actually using that sort of like spiritual worldview sort of as part of how they're discussing politics. It's not this sort of idea that, like I said, people have that something inherently fascist about occultism. So obviously, if you search through all these journals, you'll only find denunciations of communism and things like that. There are those there as well, because obviously it was a community with a diverse range of views. There were virulent anti-communists, but there were also people who were, like Eliphas Levi, were socialists, and they may not have been socialist in the sort of the Marxist sense. And this is one of the things that this Jacobin article sort of hangs on, is, oh, well, they weren't the proper kind of socialist. They were just doing this kind of like spirituality thing, and that worked very nicely with these utopian socialists who didn't really have a materialist understanding of history, let alone of reality itself. And therefore that shows that we don't need this. And for me, that makes no sense whatsoever. First of all, I mean, if we're going to say the left has been better off without it, then why are we losing? Why is the right winning when the right is, if anything, embracing occultism now? If we get rid of the idea that that is an inherent thing about fascism, the occult, then we need to say, well, okay, there is some sort of contingency here. There's some sort of praxis here. There's a strategic thing about it as well. It's just one that's purely about desire, although we do have to speak about desire. And
I was thinking too, this is also where critical enchanted materialism comes in, right? So Jane Bennett talks about enchantment as being sort of a necessary way that we feel connected with nature and with the things around us, you know. And it's, like I said, it's not just being connected to living things. As the animists believed, you know, I mean, they're still animists, as animists believe that all things have a spirit, you know. And again, you know, you can look at Swedenborg's correspondences. All things have a correspondence to in the spiritual world, between the material and the spiritual world. There's correspondence. So again, so critical enchanted materialism helps with this, because then we have more of a connection to the material things around us, and we can become, so enchantment, you know, I think it's David Morgan wrote the myth of disenchantment, right? Max Weber, the social scientist, he talked about how there was this Enlightenment process of disenchantment, starting with the Protestant Reformation, you know, through the 1500s, and it was, you know, and Marx sort of goes with this somewhat too. He says, you know, religion is what does he say? Something about an illusory sun, right? And a daisy chain, daisy pluck. The daisy must be plucked. The daisy of truth must be plucked from the illusory sun of religion. And also Engels in the German Peasants' War talks about actually the power of Luther's critique of the church, that the 95 Theses opened up this idea that you could critique the biblicalness, the scriptural basis of the church, which then opened up more kinds of critique, and eventually you can even critique the scripture itself. Right? And so for Marx and Engels, this was critique of religion that was an opening for more critical examination of all areas, including economics and politics and society and culture. And don't see much to disagree with there. I do think that criticism of religion is important, is interesting, is a valuable project. I know for myself, growing up Jehovah's Witness as I did, I had to deconstruct my faith, so to speak, as they say in the sort of Christian or post-Christian circles. And I did, and I went through that process of deconstruction. Then I went through a process of reconstruction where I looked at, well, what parts of these spiritual traditions, and I didn't, then I didn't limit myself to any particular spiritual tradition, but what parts of these spiritual traditions are valuable and worthwhile and available, and can be applied in my life to make my life better. And not only make life better, but make society better as well, because I have always wanted to make society better. I felt injustice was, out of alignment with, I think I always did sort of have a intuitive sense of harmony. And that's why Fourier speaks to me a bit when I started studying him, because deep down, I think we do have this voice of nature within us that's telling us, when things are disjointed, when things are a little off. And that's where self-help comes in, because how do we then deal with that? Once we identify a disharmony, how do we deal with it? And I always come back to the Serenity Prayer. I think it's, I used to say, I no longer accept the things I cannot change. I change the things I can't accept. Well, okay, fair enough. But yeah, some things you can't change, or at least you can't change immediately. So kind of accept that. That's fine. But I'll change the things that I can. And there are things I can change. And then, the wisdom to know the difference, right? So, peace, courage, wisdom.
My name is Bob Baxter. When I was 21 years old, I met this wonderful lady. We got married at 22 now. My dad come up to me and he says, Bob, he said, your great-grandfather was Nicarian here in Nauvoo. And year by year, things are leaving Nauvoo and we'll never see them again, the Nicarians. So he said, please, you and your wife now, advertise for Icarian items and purchase as many as you can and save them someday. Not only will they be valuable monetarily, but they'll be valuable as the history of the Icarians here now. So I approached my new bride and said, we got to spend some money. We're going to advertise in the Nauvoo paper for Icarian items. Well, she said, how much is that going to cost? I said, we can afford it, or we'll find people that can help us.
This to be valid in some ways, but there was the exploration of a kind of collective emotional texture that I think has been missing in some left organizing spaces. And when we think about, for example, the antidote.
So I was thinking about, in terms of, the tradition that I've come to adopt, New Thought, and, actually another thing Mitch Horowitz said, which, it's interesting, he says he's not a particularly political person. He kind of just thinks, sort of technocratic bureaucrats should kind of, apolitically run things or whatever. So, I don't know. But my point, bringing up that he said, at its core, New Thought is a very revolutionary idea that your thoughts can change your reality. And something else that I remember him saying was that New Thought and mind metaphysics is the religion, the spirituality of the working class, especially today, and maybe maybe in like the early 20th century, and perhaps during the Great Depression, which interestingly enough was also a time when socialism was very popular. The Communist Party of the United States, the Socialist Party USA, had their highest membership, over millions of members, and Eugene Debs ran from prison, and got over 1 million votes from prison during World War I, and then into the Great Depression. And then you had magazines like I've mentioned, like An Appeal to Reason, very interestingly named, right? Certainly not anti-rationalistic. In fact, very much the opposite. An appeal to rationalism, to reason. Which, contained articles on socialism, on labor issues, and also contained articles on New Thought. And it made me think about something that, so anyway, let me get back to Horowitz, because what he said is, then again, yes, it is repackaged and sold to you, and Trump read Norman Vincent Peale, and I don't know if he read it, but he went to his church because his father was a member of his church, and was able to use some of these things. In some ways, that it is a proof that these principles do work, even in a negative way, in a partial application. And again, Wallace Wattles has a really good summary of this, a good explanation, right? That some people, when they do these partial applications of New Thought, they do gain some success in business, but they still have a scarcity mindset. They still think of things as mine or thine, rather than a common treasury for everyone to share, as Gerard Winstanley put it. But again, what Mitch Horowitz says is that actually mind metaphysics is the metaphysics of the working class. Made me think of Reverend Ike, who was sort of a prosperity gospel black preacher in the mid 20th century, and he said, I'm basically extending Martin Luther King's program from the civic realm to the economic realm, and this is a way that people can gain the confidence and can, get the kind of abundance that they are deserving of. That is their right, their heritage as divine beings, as children of God. And that actually what Reverend Ike said was that he found that his parishioners in church, one of the things that they struggled with the most, and one of the things that they were most concerned about, was their finances. And so he started to teach about finances and how to use spiritual principles to improve your financial situation. But this is something people are concerned about. And so, I think Marx, and again, Marx is misunderstood, and also in that Left Hand podcast that I was listening to with Graham Jones, they talk about it. It's almost a cliche at this point, that religion is the opiate of the masses. It's soothing. It's it kind of helps ease the pain of life under exploitation, but also that it's the heart of a heartless world and the soul of a soulless condition, soul of a world that's lost its soul. And Martin Luther King says a country that year after year continues to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And so, as John Humphrey Noy said too, doubtless the revivalists and the socialists despise each other and will despise us for suggesting that they could be reconciled, but the socialists failed for want of regeneration of the heart, and the revivalists failed for want of regeneration of society.
And so the question is, how do you mobilize that possibility, or how do we find ways to enjoy it more? One of the risks of thinking it in terms of mobilization is that it risks a sort of, maybe the same way that neoliberal thought thinks about, like, well, how can we utilize this to make more productive workers and that sort of thing? Because
that's another thing that I think, the political people don't acknowledge, and that's there was, maybe it was Mother Jones or somebody, labor, it was like a labor slogan in the early 20th century that we want bread, but we want roses too. And, this idea of bread and roses, that, look, we don't just want the necessities of life. We don't just want a comfortable life. That would be an improvement. But also we want the joy of life. We want the wonder, the ecstasy. We want to have ecstatic and enchanted experiences. And that's where enchanted materialism comes in. We can be transfixed by things, by places, by events and experiences that we have in this life. And that is a fulfilling, exuberant experience, and it's almost like filling up our gas tank. It's like renewing us with the spiritual substance that is an abundant storehouse for us, that is a never-ending storehouse that is always available to us in a mighty channel of abundance. But that, we forget that it's there sometimes. We sense a separation between us and spirit sometimes, and it's good to maybe get away, maybe travel, maybe go for a hike, maybe look at a piece of artwork. I just read a news report for Good News that said that art, that looking at paintings has a lot of good effects on our brain and on our memory and our mood. And that, John Muir, who was an environmentalist, who was involved with, the national park projects and stuff like that, he believed that nature rejuvenated a person's soul, and after the Civil War, Frederick Jackson Turner, the historian in the early 20th century, wrote about the closing of the frontier, that there were no more frontiers in America. The West had been fenced in with barbed wire, and that, and then, then we started to turn our adventures outward, and we started to become an imperialist nation. That's his sort of thesis, but there was this sense, after the Civil War, and then as the 20th century approached, that civilization had become had sort of weakened people. And a lot of this was tied to gender and ideas of manliness, and the idea that civilization was feminizing for men and masculinizing for women. But I again, we can leave those gender parts of it, but I do think there is something about civilization, that civilization wears us down sometimes, and again, we don't just want to have a comfortable but boring life. That might be an improvement, but we also want to have ecstasy and have joy and have enchanted experiences. And so for me, that's where enchanted materialism comes in, right? Is that these enchanted moments when time and space appears to be suspended, and we seem, to transcend our surroundings and our material understandings, and we have this ecstatic experience. That those moments make life really worth living. So we're going to have to think about joy and pleasure and enchantment. The bread and butter material things are great, but that's not all there is to life. And that's something worthy of factoring in. I mean, that was John Muir and also, President Teddy Roosevelt, that, their idea was that, for the over-civilized man, that going out into nature and going for a hike and experiencing the flora and fauna of the landscape, of the wild, was a rejuvenating, spiritually, a recharge of your spiritual battery, so to speak. So this is what I mean by enchanted materialism, like Jane Bennett talks about, that these material things, material places and objects and beautiful things have the power to enchant. And again,
and the incarnation symbolized the unity of God and man, or the divinity manifesting himself in humanity and making humanity substantially divine. The very doctrine and reality which I myself had embraced even before I had heard of the Saint Simonians, if not before they had published it. The religious organization was founded on the doctrine of the progressive nature of man, and the maxim that all institutions should tend in the most speedy and direct manner possible to the constant amelioration of the moral, intellectual, and physical condition of the poorer and more numerous classes. Socially, men were to be divided into three classes: artists, savants, and industrialists or working men, corresponding to the psychological division of the human faculties. The soul has three powers or faculties: to love, to know, and to act. Those in whom the love faculty is predominant belong to the class of artists. Those in whom the knowledge faculty is predominant belong to the class of savants, the scientific and the learned. And in fine, those in whom the act faculty predominates belong to the industrial class. This classification places every man in the social category for which he is fitted, and to which he is attracted by his nature. These several classes are to be hierarchically organized under chiefs or priests, who are respectively priests of the artists, of the scientific, and of the industrials, and are, priests and all, to be subjected to a supreme father, Pere Supreme, and a supreme mother, Mere Supreme. The economical organization is to be based on the maxims to each according to his capacity, and to each according to his work. Private property is to be retained, but its transmission by inheritance or testamentary disposition must be abolished. The property is to be held by a tenure resembling that of gavelkind. It belongs to the community, and the priests, chiefs, and brehons, as the Celtic tribes call them, to distribute it for life to individuals, and to each individual according to his capacity. It was supposed that in this way the advantages of both common and individual property might be secured. Something of this prevailed originally in most nations, and a reminiscence of it still exists in the village system among the Slavonic tribes of Russia and Poland. And nearly all jurists maintain that the testamentary right by which a man disposes of his goods after his natural death, as well as that by which a child inherits from the parent, is a municipal, not a natural right. The most striking feature of the St. Simonian scheme was the rank and position it assigned to woman. It asserted the absolute equality of the sexes, and maintained that either sex is incompatible without the other. Man is an incomplete individual without woman. Hence a religion, a doctrine, a social institution founded by one sex alone is incomplete, and can never be adequate to the wants of the race or a definite order. This idea was also entertained by Frances Wright, and appears to be entertained by all our women's rights folk of either sex. The old civilization was masculine, not male and female, as God made them, hence its condemnation. The St. Simonians therefore proposed to place by the side of their sovereign father at the summit of their hierarchy a sovereign mother. The man to be sovereign father they found, but a woman to be sovereign mother, mare supreme, they found not. This caused great embarrassment and a split between Bazard and Enfantine. Bazard was about to marry his daughter, and he proposed to place her marriage under the protection of the existing French laws. Enfantine opposed his doing so, and called it a sinful compliance with the prejudices of the world. The St. Simonian society, he maintained, was a state, a kingdom within itself, and should be governed by its own laws and its own chiefs, without any recognition of those without. Bazard persisted, and had the marriage of his daughter solemnized in a legal manner, and for aught I know, according to the rites of the Church. A great scandal followed. Bazard charged Enfantine with denying Christian marriage, and with holding loose notions on the subject. Enfantine replied that he neither denied nor affirmed Christian marriage, that in enacting the existing laws on the subject, man alone had been consulted, and he could not recognize it as law till woman had given her consent to it. As yet the society was only provisionally organized, inasmuch as they had not yet found the mare supreme. The law on marriage must emanate conjointly from the Supreme Father and the Supreme Mother, and it would be irregular and a usurpation of the Supreme Father to undertake alone to legislate on the subject. Bazard would not submit, and went out and shot himself. Most of the politicians abandoned the association, and Pierre Enfantine, almost in despair, dispatched 12 apostles to Constantinople to find in the Turkish harems the Supreme Mother. After a year they returned and reported that they were unable to find her, and the society, condemned by the French courts as immoral, broke up, and broke up because no woman could be found to be its mother. And so they ended, having risen, flourished, and decayed in less than a single decade. The points in the St. Simonian movement that attracted my attention and commanded my belief were what it will seem strange to my readers could ever have been doubted. Its assertion of a religious future for the human race, and that religion in the future as well as in the past must have an organization, and a hierarchical organization. Its classification of men according to the predominant psychological faculty in each into artists, savants, and industrials struck me as very well, and the maxims, to each according to his capacity, and to each according to its works, as evidently just and desirable if practicable. The doctrine of the divinity in humanity, of progress, of no essential antagonism between the spiritual and the material, and of the duty of shaping all institutions for the speediest and continuous moral, intellectual, and physical amelioration of the poorer and more numerous classes, I already held. I was rather pleased than otherwise with the doctrine with regard to property, and thought it a decided improvement on that of a community of goods.
So that we have, of course, the great big shake-up at the very beginning of the 19th century, that is in the 1800s, called the French Revolution, which, of course, is a great big social, political upheaval, and which also is, at least in part, combined with the tail end, so to say, of the era of the Enlightenment, which, unfortunately for the culture, came to manifest to a very large extent by the time of the 19th century in rationalism. And this rationalism was, let's say, ended up being a pretty bad thing. Rationalism is a sort of a spiritual weed killer, because it kills, just like a chemical of that sort, if you pour it on your flowers, spread it on your flowers as well as your weeds, it'll kill everything. I certainly have experimented with such weed killers, and they, if you use enough of them, they will turn California into a replica of the Sonora Desert, So that, let's say, rationalism did wound the mainstream religiosity of Roman Catholicism and also to some extent Protestantism quite severely. But it also wounded the esoteric tradition quite severely. And so by the middle part sort of the 19th century, the need arose for it to step out of the shadows once more in a manner which would attract interest and approval of a certain elite, of a certain growing edge of the culture. And that is what happened very largely, initially, by way of the activities of one single individual, and that is the one whom we are speaking of tonight. He died in 1875, and he carried on his activities for a number of decades prior to that time. His influence was very great, not only on people who directly felt interested in and ultimately committed to the esoteric tradition, but on creative individuals of the culture in general. Initially innumerable French authors, and later on in quite a large number of authors of the German and of the English-speaking world were greatly influenced by this person, such as, for instance, the French authors, and these were not really occultists, the ones whom I mentioned now. The occult group is yet another one, but people like Catulle Mendès, Villiers de l'Isle-Adam, Joris Karl Huysmans, Baudelaire, Victor Hugo, Mallarmé, all of these were great admirers of, and openly admitted many times that they were greatly influenced by the strange and mysterious man whom they called Eliphas Levi. And of course, by way of the Theosophical Society, which was founded in the very year of Levi's death, 1875, Other things happened in that year too, such as the birth of Carl Gustav Jung, for instance, and on perhaps the less reputable side, also the birth of a man named Edward Alistair Crowley, and who, with his typical low self-esteem and self-deprecating tendency upon his growing up, immediately proclaimed that he was the reincarnation of Eliphas Levi, having been born, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months after Levi's death. Now, what I propose to do at this point is to give you a, well, let's say a picture, little highlights of the biography of Levi first, and then go into some of his teachings and try to explain in what way so many of his teachings were unique and how they had really that great creative stimulating effect upon the culture and others. But I think it's quite important initially that we get a little bit of a picture of the man. And of course, actually his life, as far as the outer data are concerned, is fairly easily told. He was born on February 8, 1810, the son of a shoemaker in Paris. He was a solitary, artistic, meditative child. In 1822, at his first communion, he had a mystical experience relative to, as he called it, a God who sacrifices himself for his creatures. He was advised by his teachers, and he accepted the advice to study for the priesthood of the Catholic Church, which was, after all, the only one around. And so he entered first a kind of a little kids preparatory school, and then what often is called the little seminary, which is the lower, it's already a seminary but of the lower grades. You usually enter that when you're about 10 years old, called Saint-Nicolas de Chardonnay. And there he was influenced by a teacher, a priest, the Abbé Frère Colonna, who was eventually fired from his job, you guessed it, for heterodoxy and for heretical tendencies. So in the very training ground of the Roman Catholic Church, the little fellow, whose name incidentally by family was Alphonse Louis Constant, had received already some heretical indoctrination. He then entered the major seminary of Saint-Sulpice, and his life there was beset by difficulties. The large majority of his fellow students were sort of little career-crazy ecclesiastical politicians in the making. And all they were interested in was how to advance themselves in front of their teachers and how to sort of influence their future careers in a favorable manner at an early time. And little Alphonse found out that often, if you are looking for really religious people, the last place where you should look for them is in the seminaries and the training grounds of the churches. Unfortunate though that situation may be.
Now, the occultists usually work out some kind of a cosmology or a complete esoteric system of the universe. Usually it's a very, very complicated, graded hierarchy with various levels of initiations. Now let me say before I go any further that though I have found much that is helpful and interesting in certain occult teachers, I must say that the emphasis on the mystery and the masters leaves me less than warm, or I should say leaves me cold. This is in no way to deal derogatorily with the various occult teachings. It's simply to indicate my particular state of consciousness, which may be less than high enough to grasp these higher bodies. I can say that through my years of truth-seeking, which cover a pretty broad span of years, and I don't want to act like a graybeard, but I have been exposed to many of the teachings and have given some time and thought and given a little research to most of them, or all of them, that we're going to deal with tonight. And so therefore I'm not simply speaking offhandedly and something that I don't know very much about, but I've come to the conclusion that for myself, that since I am a creative expression of the one mind, that I can have what Emerson refers to as a first-hand and immediate experience with God. I believe that I have a master, and to me the master is the Christ of my own being, which is simply the divine dimension of my own nature, and that I am forever in the presence of this master of my own being that is constantly seeking to reveal itself to me and through me as the next step in my unfoldment. I'm also well aware of the fact that many of the students who in one time or another have listened to my exposés have had other personal feelings about life, and I have had many people through the years tell me that they insist that they see a little man standing next to me, a man that almost invariably wears a goatee, and he is my personal master, according to some. And I don't know, this may be true. I feel that if it is true, I waste an awful lot of time putting a lot of effort in myself. I should just let him take over. But again, this is just to speak lightheartedly about my own personal bent. Now, just to kind of sum up a little bit, without giving the impression, certainly, of being too judgmental to it all, New Thought in general, in the new insight that we deal with, certainly here at the center, in which many of us have been involved in, puts the emphasis on the individual's unique relationship to God, the one presence and the one power. And instead of emphasis on a cosmology or involvement with masters in the past and future eras of development, the new insight as we deal with it today normally places the emphasis on the now and on personal growth today. The emphasis is essentially on the pragmatic. And I think this is a very important point, that normally in modern New Thought, one is asked less to believe than to test the principles in experience. Much of the occult teachings is based upon, first of all, the fact that you accept certain things on faith. This is the way it is. In the modern New Insight in Truth, we're simply dealing with certain fundamental principles. If they work, fine. If they don't, then they're not worthy to be considered. By their fruits ye shall know them, as Jesus said. Also, in the modern New Thought movement, I think generally there is an attitude of leaving the student open completely and entirely to outside involvement with any kind of teachings, and especially the occult teachings. So that it is probably true that many, quite a large percentage of so-called truth students have some kind of involvement with occult idealisms, and probably find some personal satisfaction and some personal fulfillment through it, and this is great. I believe personally that one should exercise a great deal of judgment. It is so easy to become involved in the mechanics of esoteric studies to the extent that one forsakes the needs of today, that he gets so involved in the various stages of ultimate evolution in the cosmology and about his past incarnations and so forth, that he loses the awareness that life is a now experience and he has relationships today that are very important, which is reminiscent of Ralph Waldo Emerson's thought about a man whom he says rose to the empyrean heights and dove to the unfathomable depths, but never paid cash. And I think that says it all, that it is very possible to get so involved in this type of thing that one loses the awareness of today's experience and of the need to work out his his salvation through developing his consciousness and his thoughts right here and now today. This is not to say that the occult teachings do not have a lot of validity. Certainly they are very eclectic, there's no question about it. As we see the evolution of Madame Blavatsky, we see how she had a wide variety of sources, most of them from the East, much of them emphasizing Buddhism and Hinduism, and putting together some of the concepts of Christianity and some picking up some of the idealisms of Tibet and of the Far East, China and so forth. In no way makes this erroneous. It simply is an awareness, certainly, that certain aspects of truth have existed throughout all eternity, and there are many, many ways to get to the heart of the real insight or the mysteries or the wisdom of the universe. One is obviously left free to his own devices.
Beauty is invasive, right? It ambushes us, it surprises us. And then when we create these, I guess you would say, these tableau of aesthetic images and hierarchies and so forth, a sort of uniformed reality of the aesthetic, that actually serves the very opposite purpose. It keeps the possibility of that rupture at bay.
Yeah, and rupture, I think, is a really interesting one to connect us from sort of like these conversations of consciousness and maybe spirituality back into politics as well, because the notion of rupture in a political sense is there's almost like a uniplanar, is that a word? A single plane of reality when we're talking about historical movements. For me, I'm always trying to think in sort of multiple levels at the same time. And for me, whether we're talking about a rupture or an event, this is something that happens on all sorts of scales. You have ruptures even on the sort of the molecular level. You have ruptures on your global world historical level. And it's one of the questions is, how do you connect those? And that for me is key actually to what we might think of as revolution. I know it's actually quite a vague term, but there is sort of a multi-scale interconnection of the ruptures. And in that, you need to have this sort of consideration for the individual, but just not the individual on its own, but its individual and how it's interconnected up and up until we get to that larger scale. And so with beauty and the sublime experience, this is another way that we can think of these concepts outside of a specifically spiritual kind of language. The sublime and that sort of feeling of if something's taking your breath away, it's almost indicative of fear at the same time as this enjoyment and that's kind of how I understand awe. It's the balance between the sort of like sense of being very small, whether physically or in some way metaphorically, spiritually, being small in comparison to the enormity of something else, the enormity of a scene, the enormity of devastation, or the enormity of beauty, or the enormity of potential, the enormity of the unknown. And in that there is a risk in awe, because if we want to connect that into a utopian, going back to the sort of like block, sort of like almost ontologized kind of utopianism, where you're saying the possibilities of things are actually imminent in present, literally at the level of reality itself. The scale of what can be done goes far beyond what the human mind could possibly even begin to comprehend. And you could have sublime experiences simply just by honing your mind in on the present moment and trying to make yourself as bodily aware as possible of all of the potentials of everything around you and how much everything could change and how much of an effect you could have on the world, or how much the world could develop. And it could actually be quite sort of freeze you. You could be so overwhelmed that you are not able to access action.
because fear is not actually the most motivating on its own.
Good news!
Welcome, friends, to another edition of Good News. True stories from across the world reminding us that compassion is alive, miracles are possible, and ordinary people are still capable of extraordinary love through siege and sorrow. Our second story brings us back to the United States. On June 28, 2025, in Bethesda, Maryland, a neighborhood performed a summer miracle. 9-year-old Casey Zachman, diagnosed with terminal medulloblastoma, told her parents she wished she could celebrate Christmas one more time. With only 6 days' notice, neighbors rose to the moment. Despite the heat, families strung up Christmas lights. 24 fire trucks formed a parade. Santa arrived on an antique engine. Hundreds lined the streets in the rain just to wave and send love. Casey, in her nutcracker pink dress, ran toward the festivities with a joyful energy her family hadn't seen in years. Her mother said, "There are really no words to describe how incredible everyone is." Photos and videos of support came in from all 50 states, turning what had long been Diagnosis Day into something new, Christmas in June. Throughout 2025, BBC reporters followed indigenous Quechua farmers, keepers of over 1,300 potato varieties cultivated across centuries. In communal seed banks, these farmers work with scientists to safeguard this genetic and cultural inheritance. Meanwhile, highland communities are reviving ancient crops like quinoa and kiwicha, strengthening food security in the face of climate uncertainty. Farmer Victoria Quispe, tending fields her ancestors tended before her, stands as a reminder that hope can be planted, watered, and passed down one seed at a time. Our final story today comes from the world of neuroscience, where researchers have uncovered a quiet and hopeful truth about the way we see. On December 2nd, 2025, scientists reporting in PNAS Nexus shared evidence that what we experience as visual beauty may be rooted in energy efficiency itself. The human brain, which consumes 20% of all the body's energy and whose visual system alone uses nearly half of that, instinctively favors images that require fewer neurons and less metabolic work. Using computer modeling, human ratings, and brain imaging, researchers discovered something profoundly simple. Images that take less effort to process feel more beautiful. As Emerson once wrote, "Never lose an opportunity of seeing anything beautiful, for beauty is God's handwriting." And perhaps part of that handwriting is written in biology itself, our neurons whispering thank you when the world is easy on the eyes. In the study, more than 1,000 people rated nearly 5,000 images. Time after time, the most beautiful were those that struck a sweet balance between interest and calm, a harmony that Emerson might have recognized when he said, "If eyes were made for seeing, then beauty is its own excuse for being." The scientists emphasize that this effect appears in our instant, first impressions, not in the deeper meanings we attach to art over time. But there too Emerson left us guidance. The beauty of nature reforms itself in the mind, and not for barren contemplation, but for new creation. If beauty lightens the brain's burden, it may be because it invites us not only to rest, but also to imagine, shape, and create. As he said, love of beauty.
Now to the story of a pig that is inspiring others. One pot-bellied pig has certainly endured his share of problems. Chris P. Bacon was born without the use of his Yeah, you have to read this story. We cannot. Oh my God.
This has been
Good news!
Good News is brought to you by Uncle Ernie's Happiness Ads.
This is another Uncle Ernie happiness ad. And what could be happier than a little girl having a big sister to feed her and laugh with her and play with her and to love her? That's family life for you. A lot of fun. Big sister, little sister, play, look at each other and laugh. Don't have to be any joke, just laugh and have fun. Isn't that cute? Coochie coochie coo. And another fun thing is, nice to have great grandmas. Little girls to have great grandmas too, to sit on their lap and to read to and talk to. And look at pictures. Great grandmas for little girls and little boys. And grandmas too. Here comes grandma. How about that? And grandpas. Grandpas are nice to have. And mamas. Mamas are very important to watch television with and do other things.
This week's meditation is a past life meditation based on the teachings of Edgar Cayce from the 1990 VHS presentation, Remembering Egypt.
I'm going to count downward from 10 to 1. And with every descending number, slowly blink your eyes. Just look forward at the screen. Slowly blink your eyes in slow motion with every number. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now, if you feel like closing your eyes, do so. Become aware of the feeling in your eyelids and let them become totally relaxed. Feel the relaxation begin in your forehead and then begin to flow throughout your entire body. All over you are becoming more relaxed. Breathe in relaxation and breathe out any tension that remains. Even a light state of relaxation can give you a very valuable experience. I am going to count downward from 10 to 1 more time, this time a little more quickly. And as I count, with every descending number, feel yourself becoming more and more relaxed. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You are now in your own level of deep relaxation. You are in complete control, totally relaxed, and totally at peace. You are completely aware of the activities of your mind and can accept or reject anything that comes to you. It's okay to let go. You can relax your mind, simply letting your subconscious listen to my voice. You are in a place of safety. It's okay to let go and simply relax. You are going to let your mind wander back in time to a safe place before the present. You are going to learn about your past in Egypt. Totally relaxed and detached, you will observe the very best experience you lived in Egypt of long ago. You'll be able to see it clearly in your imagination with a feeling of total safety and security. I'm going to count once more, and as I count, you will find yourself in the Egypt of long ago, totally relaxed and totally in control. Your best experience there. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a deep breath and feel comfortable. Imagine you find yourself standing before the Great Pyramid of Giza. Slowly, ever so slowly, the haziness clears, and you can see the magnificent structure coming into focus and towering before you. With greater and greater clarity, the Great Pyramid stands before you. As you stand before the Great Pyramid, mentally look down at your feet. Notice what you are wearing. Or are they bare? Without analyzing, just look at your feet and mentally record what you sense or feel. What does it feel like to be who you are, standing before this magnificent emblem of Egypt? Look at the ground. What does it look like? And now, continue to look slowly at your body. What are you wearing? Feel the texture. For a moment, look over your entire body and take into your mind the clothes you are wearing. Are you a grown-up or a child? Are you a male or a female? Notice any jewelry. Focus on whatever appears to be in the clearest, sharpest focus. Make a mental note of who you are and what you seem to be doing. Now, in your mind's eye, slowly look around at the Giza Plateau. Look around at the scenery. Feel the warmth of the sun upon your face. Feel the mood of this place. Make a mental note of what you see and feel. Do you see other structures? Can you see the Sphinx? Make a mental note of your deepest feelings so that you can recall these things later. What does it feel like to be alive during these glorious days of Egypt? Are there bushes, animals, people around you? If you have difficulty seeing, simply try to hear or feel this place. Let the memories come forward as a present image. And now you may look around for other people. Look for a time when you see yourself near or with these other people. Make a note of who they are, recording your impressions. Perhaps there is someone very special, someone with whom you have a close bond. Make note of your feelings. If you listen quietly, you may even hear their names being spoken. And now, if you listen very closely, you may hear your own name being spoken by a friend or a child, or someone just calling out to you. What do they call you? What do you do in this Egypt of long ago? And now, you may wish to move to a major event in your life, a time that had important meaning for you, and focus on what is happening. Take these things in to remember. And now the time has come to get more of a feeling of who you are and where you are. I'm going to count backward from 3, and when I reach 1, you will find yourself in a scene from your childhood in this Egyptian lifetime. Okay? 3, 2, 1. Do you see yourself? Look around at where you are. What's going on? Take it all in. I'm going to let you go to another period in your life. I'm going to count from 3 to 1, and when I get to 1, you'll be a little older, maybe a teenager, and it will be an important event. 3, 2, 1. What is happening? What are you feeling? Take it all in. I'm going to count from 3 once more, and when I finish, you'll find yourself in one of the highest points of your life. You can go backward or forward. I'm going to count from 3, and you'll be at this time. 3, 2, 1. You're there. What makes this time so wonderful? Where are you? Take it all in. Enjoy it. And now, in a very detached way, we're going to take a look at the time of your death in this life. I'm going to count from 5, and when I finish, you'll become a bystander at the time of your death. Remember, death is simply the next stage of life, so there's nothing to fear. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here you are at the point of death. Did you accomplish what you came in to do? What was the purpose for this lifetime? Was anything left uncompleted? Slowly watch yourself cross the border between life and death. Look at the experience and take it all in. What was it like? Ask yourself, what was this life designed to teach you? And what did it teach you? See if you can look at this life in Egypt. See all of the events tied together so that you can see this life in Egypt as a whole. Now, imagine all the events in your current life standing side by side this life in Egypt. Do you see any similarities? Do you see any patterns that repeated? Do you see any people that you know now that you knew then? Look at all of the lines that connect these lives together. Take a final look around at your surroundings in this long ago past. Look into your own eyes and into the eyes of the people you have seen. Let love flow from yourself into everyone from that long ago past. And as you send them love, bless them, and let them and your surroundings begin to fade. And as they fade, let them go. Release them. Forgive anything that needs to be forgiven so that only love remains. Let this experience slowly fade into the past so that only positive and objective memories remain. And as you slowly begin coming back, traveling back through time, you can bring with you all that was positive and bright and interesting and important. Other information you may release or forget. You will retain in your conscious mind only that which is helpful, important, and beneficial. Now, begin returning to the levels of your own mind. Bring back anything that may help you understand who you are right now, in this time and this place. Come back through the years to this life. plant your feet firmly in the present. Become who you are right now. I will count from 1 to 10. At the count of 10, you can open your eyes, be wide awake, clear-headed, and feeling fine. I will begin to count now. 1, 2, coming back very slowly. 3, 4, feeling life energies return to your body. 5, 6, feeling revitalized. 7, feeling better than you've felt before. 8, fully reoriented into the present. 9, feeling like yourself. And 10, open your eyes and feel wide awake. You may wish to record your feelings and experiences at this time. You may find that each time you try this experience, you will have deeper and deeper states of relaxation, and more vivid memories come to you. You may wish to wait a few days before trying this again, and if nothing happened, give yourself and your imagination another chance sometime when you can become more completely relaxed. Thank you for being a part of our Egyptian experience. May all your memories be hopeful, helpful, and happy adventures.